Good afternoon. It is indeed the afternoon, Friday afternoon. Welcome to the Road to Recovery, the Road to Freedom with Mark. This is my 28-minute slot every Friday afternoon where I talk a bit about mental health. That's my main subject. And not just mental health, but all of the things that go with it, about comments about society and human behaviour and how that affects people who suffer from mental health issues like depression and bipolar and stuff like that. Now, this is not something that I've just jumped on the bandwagon with. This is something that I have done for many years, long before anyone even gave a toss about any of this. And then all of a sudden this tsunami comes along of hope and fine words, and then we move on, because that's how life is. And I was thinking as I was driving in today, and this is really for the young people who might watch this show or listen to it, those teenagers and 20-year-olds, you know, I absolutely guarantee you, I know for a fact, that your life, the world will change beyond recognition in the next 3 or 4 decades. And I remember this tree when I was just a youngster. I used to jump over the top of it, you know. And I went back to the same place 45 years later to look at that tree. And it wasn't even recognisable. It was huge. And I had the same experience recently when I went up to the Coromandel, just north of Whirianga on the east coast there, and even on the west of the peninsula as well. There are some massive purtukawa. They are just absolutely awe-inspiring. They have got to such a huge size now, and you know, they have the sort of Damocles hanging over them with this myrtle rust. It may well wipe them out. And in some ways, I'll be glad I'll be dead and not see it, should they ever die, because, I mean, it will be truly heartbreaking. They are just wondrous. What can I say? Amazing things. But it just, you know, when I was up there as a 16-year-old, so that'd be, 40 years ago, they were big, but now, oh man. And it just goes to show how much life changes. You know, I often say to young people, you know, there is every chance that you will not have a job in a few decades' time, and certainly your children won't. There will be no such thing as jobs. There won't be a requirement for us to do things like that. There will be machines that do open heart surgery, computers and robots that are better at it than we are. I remember a long time ago now, good 30 years ago, I went to Berlin, and there was a motor vehicle assembly, and the car went from start to finish without a human hand touching it, and that was 30 years ago. Technology has marched on so far with automation the way it's going now. You know, I used to go in my job, I used to go and visit a lot of factories, and they would show me CAD machines where they designed physical things with it only on a computer. They were vaporware. They didn't really exist at all, except in this computer. And yet they could calculate things like flow dynamics in a valve. And this is incredible stuff. And then, once they'd finished and they were happy with their design, they would get the computer to tell a robot exactly how to machine a piece of brass to make a Venturi valve. Now, I know you may not understand everything I'm saying, and I understand it's a specialist subject, but the point is, it was all done by computers and machines. So, the fact of the matter is, a lot of stuff is going to be done automatically. I've seen, computers that can run machines to round up cows and milk them, check them, and send them back out into the field without being touched. Things that you consider to be manual labour that could never be replaced by machinery. Well, think again. Everything and anything can be done, and it is limited only by our imagination, our ambition, and our will. So it will change the world completely. And because we're in the thick of it, we don't realise that we're in a constant state of flux, that there is this eternal evolution about how we look at things and how we drive things. And yet there are some eternal truths. I like to read works of the great men of history. I read a bit of Plato, Socrates and stuff like that. And the funny thing is, the things that they complained about 2,000 years ago are exactly the same things that we complain about today. The problems they had then are the problems we have now. And the way that they addressed them is identical too. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, because we are obstinate creatures, we keep hitting our thumbs with a hammer over and over and over again just because we're obstinate. We don't have the intelligence or the courage or the capacity to realise that sometimes there's a better way. Now, when I was growing up, I lived in a very, very religious society, Roman Catholic, and well, to this day I can still quote you Psalms and Proverbs and all that jazz, and I mean, I haven't touched the Bible in decades, but I still know it verbatim. And in that period of time, which hadn't been very long, little more than half a lifetime, I have watched this country change how it defines itself. There was a time when the majority of people claimed to have some kind of belief, some kind of religion in them, and today, not at all, not at all. The only thing you hear in churches these days are echoes, because they're so damned empty. Everybody has walked away, and there's been a number of reasons for that. One of which is that many of the people who were in charge proved themselves to be unworthy of people's trust. And, we lived by a set of rules, the 10 Commandments, but these things have gone out of the window now. We are no longer a religious people, and we do not teach our children the 10 Commandments. How many children could quote you all 10 in order? I would say less than 1%, and I'd be right. So we don't have that moral guideline, that anchor anymore. So what are we teaching our children? Well, I'm an observer of humankind. I sit on park benches and I watch how people behave, especially parents with children. And I must say, it's very, very disappointing to see how parents teach their children to disregard rules and laws. Nobody uses pedestrian crossings anymore. They don't. They're too selfish. They'd rather hold up the traffic and dodge in and out so they can make a beeline to their cars. The rules and regulations by which I lived, the common courtesy, the please and thank you, children to be seen and not heard, all this nonsense. Well, okay, some of it was unfair and cruel, but some of it was damn fine too, because we were taught about morals and things like that. And that has deteriorated. It has absolutely gone down the gurgler. Everybody is encouraged to be self-indulgent now, to be self-obsessed, to rush and grab and go into debt and serve yourself. And this is one of the problems that we have, and this affects the mental health of people, because we treat others sometimes with complete disregard. And invariably, some people get broken as a result, and they end up on the scrap heap. That's what the dole is. That's what you're resigned to. You're allowed food and shelter, the absolute minimum of, and that is it. You're not really encouraged to have possessions or a car or anything like that. So you don't really get to live if you're on a so-called benefit. I tell you, it's a benefit to nobody. It's just, it's sad and it's sick, and it makes people sick. It affects people's mental health. Poverty is one of the greatest drivers of the problems of our society, not just mental health issues, but crime as well. If you can't get it, and all of the media is telling you, get it, get it, get it, get it, get it, what are you going to do? Beg, steal, prostitution, drugs, one or the above, in all likelihood. Because people just, they won't do without, so they'll take. And that hurts, it violates those around them, and that thing feeds on itself. The majority of the crime committed is committed by poor people, and the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be a criminal and to be mentally unwell. So, the bottom line is, we need to pick each other up. We need to show kindness and consideration. We need to try and empower people and cooperate. Most importantly, cooperate with each other. Money isn't going to fall out of the sky, so we have to find another way to skin that cat. We have to say, well, let's maybe look after each other a little bit more, and we will find that crime diminishes, mental health problems diminish, if we just take a little bit of care of each other and recognise that whilst we've lost our moral codes, that doesn't make us immoral people. We know when we're doing wrong. Everybody knows instinctively the difference between right and wrong, and we all know that we don't do enough, and that's what this show is about, to try and encourage each other to just show a bit of kindness and consideration and thought to those less well off than you, those suffering from mental health issues. If we can just look after each other a little bit more, this country would be a hell of a lot better place to live in. If we weren't so damn selfish and obsessed with fences and keeping others out, and just show a little bit of consideration, not a whole lot. I'm not talking about us suddenly becoming angels, but just, not so nasty. That's all. All right. Well, times are ticking. It's always flying by. It's time for my story today, and this is a complete divergence from where we were. This is from my days when I was a commercial fisherman. This is pieces of silver. The old mate woke me about 4:30 a.m. one morning in spring. I was staying in a large caravan out back of his place. We were in the middle of fishing for groper and had a few more tons to land. I sprung out of bed as I knew we had a big day ahead of us. Work clothes were hurriedly pulled on as I stumbled into the darkness towards the flat deck ute. "All right, mate," said Tom as he handed me a coffee and fired up the ute. We headed up to the refrigerated container that held boxes of bait and took 6 for the day's fishing. Then we loaded up 140 litres of diesel from the main tank and headed down the road to the bulldozer and boat. It was still dark when we arrived and filled the tanks and stowed the gear. I put on my all-weather overalls and started cutting baits. Cuda frozen whole is easiest filleted solid, but it freezes the hands fast. Despite the numbness and the razor-sharp blade, I worked as fast as I could go. We needed 300 baits of cuda and squid prepared before we reached the fishing grounds. It would take my best efforts to be ready on time, and Tom would accept no excuses. Right on the first hint of light, Tora drove over his quad bike ready to back the boat into the sea using a large metal cradle and a D9 Caterpillar bulldozer. The drawbar connecting the bulldozer to the cradle was about 15 metres, so it was able to get us in deep enough water from the beach. But beach launches are never easy. Still, he backs us into the water with a great puff of black smoke and some consummate skill. Tom kicks over the two D4 Caterpillar engines on board the boat, and they bark into life on demand. He listens carefully as he warms the motors for any hint of a problem which must be addressed before we head out. With nothing obviously untoward, he engages the twin Hamilton jets they drive and swings us round to face the ocean. Meanwhile, it's back to baits for me. Head down, but the smell is quite bearable as everything we use has been frozen fresh, and fresh is the key. Tom goes through the motions of checking the gear, first the electronics, then the jets, then a knowing eye over the hauling gear, and finally over me and the hundreds of traces behind me that we will be sending to the bottom in a few hours. Happy that all is in order, Tom opens up the motors and puts on some Johnny Cash as he plots a path down to the fishing grounds. I feel the boat's bow rise to the challenge and try to move in rhythm with it so as not to slice my hands, now rather numb. Tom buries his head in the navigational gear after putting on the kettle, and we have a tiny break as I make it coffee. The sun is rising magnificently today, and it lights up the gnarly coastal cliffs, all orange, red and blue, with wisps of mist still licking the gullies. But we have only minutes to take in the view before it's back to toil. For after cutting a few hundred baits, the traces must be baited up and laid out ready for later. We lose no time as the engines roar on and the jets push us along at a good 30 knots. It's not easy getting all the baits ready in time, but I battle on and check the main lines, floats, anchors, clips, traces and ropes in sequence exactly how Tom showed me. Everything must run like clockwork, or it could cost us in gear, injury, or even our lives, and this is the most dangerous occupation there is. Satisfied that all is in order, I report briefly to my skipper, and he glances over everything himself for satisfaction. "That's good. Now cut some more baits, would you?" is all he has to say, then turns his attention back to the engines and electronics. Out here our roles are very much changed, and it is important we function as a unit. Tom becomes the skipper, and must make decisions quickly and without impedance. I must follow orders with understanding and as quickly as possible. No hesitation or misunderstanding can be tolerated, or the consequences could be dire for us both. At times this necessity tests both patience and friendship, but we both approach it from the angle of understanding, so we can work safely and quickly together. The hours pass so quickly, I scarcely have time to have all ready as we arrive on the grounds we call the holes. There are a series of holes and cliff faces rising steeply from the abyss, a place where current is naturally churned up by the changing tides. We have coincided our arrival with the turning of the tide, a time when countless billions of plankton rise from the depths of night time to photosynthesize during the morning. They turn the sea a beautiful green with their vast numbers and fill our hearts with expectation. The timing of our arrival is crucial, and the tides are erratic, influenced by more subtle forces than the moon alone. Old skippers, now long gone, taught Tom the secrets of this place decades ago when the Italians and Greeks fished these places. Now that they're gone, Tom is one of the last with the knowledge which is the crucial difference between success and failure. We cannot see the plankton on the fish finding gear, the electronics not being sensitive enough, but what preys on them is clearly evident. With jaw-dropping clarity, we see 15 to 25 metres deep of an uncountable swarm of tiny fish of many different species, following up and feeding on the tiny plankton. Most of these fish are never seen by humans, and much of their lives remains a mystery, as this is a truly wild and far-flung corner of the world. What feeds on them is our glittering prize, our pieces of silver. Groper are our target species today, fishing in a depth of approximately 250 metres. Above them are blue-nosed Wairarapa, a delectable but less valuable species we will also take, and below the groper are bass. A related if somewhat uglier species, the bass are every bit as good to eat and pay the same good money. The more groper we catch, however, the happier we will be. 100 fish for the day is our unspoken rule for a really good day, but they are few and far between. Today looks especially good. Tom snoops around with his electronic gear, cruising slowly over the cliff faces as the sonar shows signs of promise everywhere. We're in no rush at this point, as timing is everything. We must have our baits at exactly the right place and depth to get amongst our prize, so we must sum up our line of attack before we move. During this time, the most incredible transition begins to take place. Until now, we have been tracked by the great royal albatross. They have been soaring majestically high on the thermals, watching and waiting patiently. Now as we slow, they descend with anticipation of an ensuing feast. And they are only the first wave. Other albatross and mollymawks, a little smaller, arrive on the scene. Half a dozen soon become many dozen of these magnificent masters of the sky. In turn they attract other ocean-going birds like painted pigeons which swim underwater as if they were flying. Within half an hour we already have a small city of chattering birds moving expectantly before the first bait has touched the water. We come around again along the now plotted course and begin fishing in earnest. We start by tying an anchor or pick on the bottom. The main line is attached to a rope knotted every 50 metres so I can count it out. This job must be done at breakneck speed, so the anchor finds exactly the right spot on the cliff face where the groper are feeding. Only the experience of many thousands of drops has taught Tom the right way. We move on to the next cliff face and start the procedure again, and a fourth and a fifth. By the time we have finished the drops and stopped for a coffee, it is time to go back to the beginning and start hauling. I hook up the large floats over the davit arm and Tom engages the hydraulic hauler. As the rope tenses, we can feel the groper wriggling on the ends. The myriad of birds seems to anticipate the action as the first few hooks come up empty. Tom unclipped the traces and I removed the now used baits and throw them overboard to the noisy waiting birds. But soon we see colour and 6 beautiful silver grey groper float to the surface, each weighing about 10 kilos. Tom unclips them and I remove the hooks so they can be gutted immediately. We rebait and drop the line again and slowly motor up to the next line as Tom expertly removes their heads with great thwacks of his large knife. The fourth line, which promises to make our day, starts to come up, then suddenly straightens and slows, then starts again. Tom and I shoot each other worried glances as we hesitate. We stare down into the depths for answers as the first hooks come up straightened out, as if some massive fish has torn both bait and fish off from the traces. A few more great tugs and it dawns upon us that we are being robbed. We stare down into the green depths for answers, and slowly the huge black shape of a whale comes into view, plucking the groper off the hooks like a bunch of grapes. Stunned at the audacity of these creatures, we are mesmerised for a minute as we are helpless to respond. "Dirty, rotten bastards," swears Tom under his breath, as the pod of whales starts to ascend, their black and white markings coming into view. Due to their great bulk, our little hooks have no effect on them and they are free to rob us at will. "Get the gear in quick as you can," shouts Tom, concerned we might snag up on a whale and lose some gear. At the same time, I see another whale come up behind us. At 15 metres long, it is as long as our boat, and it floats right up to the stern, almost touching the jet with its nose. "Pilot whales," informs Tom, as I stare as captivated by this great beast as he is with our boat. We then break into action to retrieve our gear as quickly as possible. As we do so, it becomes obvious that we have been defeated in our efforts, not by the elements or our elusive prey, but a pod of robbing whales. All 4 lines have been similarly decimated, so we are forced to retrieve the gear and pack it away as the whales hover around checking us out. They are so close we can see their eyes, and I cannot help but think there is some undeniable intelligence behind them. What should have been a successful day of at least 100 groper has suddenly been curtailed into only 38 slabs of valuable silver. We managed to retrieve the gear safely, and are forced to turn home early, beaten by our curious company. We make it back to the landing by midday, and sinking solace in the fact that we have at least made wages for the day, but rue the fact it could have been so much better. We will be back there soon to try our luck again, as this was a rare meeting with these Goliaths of the deep. Still, it was an experience that will stay in our minds for years to come. The end. Well, that's me for another day. I hope you enjoyed my little story. You might have noticed that I had to jump around in that story a little bit. I'm always pressed for time. I guess I talk too much. But my last and parting words will say thank you very much for all you wonderful people up in the Hawke's Bay, you fabulous people down here in the Wairarapa, to the sponsors, New Zealand On Air, and all the rest of the sponsors who keep this place going, and most importantly to Michael and Veronica. They have been ever so good to me over the years, allowed me to do this show even though it costs. I have no sponsorship, but they let me do it anyway because they consider what they do a worthy cause. And this is a not-for-profit organisation, you know, it can only run on the funds it's given, but these kind people have allowed me to do my thing, and whilst not everyone might agree with me all of the time, I have a perspective that is probably a little unusual, and when you consider what I have to say, you'll realise that I'm more recalcitrant than offensive, you know, and everyone should be listened to, and everybody's opinion is worthy of at least listening to. Reject it if you wish, but, you know, I always hope that we can make a better place together. So I want you to ponder that until I see you next time, next Friday. So, ciao for now. Take care.